In a world where ancient traditions and brutal customs dictated everything, a quiet tension hung in the air. It was the kind of tension that only warriors knew well, the feeling that something was about to erupt, though no one could tell exactly when or why. It was a time of peace, or so it seemed. Yet, deep in the heart of the city, shadows lingered, and old enemies waited. The story begins with a warrior named Kale, a man who had spent his life in service to his people, his blade always ready for battle. He was not the strongest, nor the most skilled, but there was something about him that drew attention, a fire in his spirit, a willingness to fight for others, even at the cost of his own life. This warrior had never been the type to seek glory, but something far greater than personal ambition guided his every step. He fought for those who couldn't protect themselves, and that was all that mattered to him. One day, in the midst of a routine patrol, Kale's life would change forever. It started when they received news of an unexpected invasion from the Vulpine, a species of powerful fox-like aliens known for their strict codes of honor and combat. They were a race with ancient traditions that valued strength above all else. Their attacks were swift, their warriors fierce, and no one had expected them to strike so soon. The Vulpine were a mystery to most. Their ways were not well understood by humans, and there had been uneasy whispers about them for years. Some feared them, others simply respected their power. But Kale City had never been one to back down from a challenge. The people were prepared, or so they thought. It was early morning when the first Vulpine warships appeared on the horizon. Kale, along with a few dozen soldiers, stood on the city's outer wall, watching the ships grow larger and larger with every passing moment. The enemy was coming, but no one knew why. The Vulpine had no reason to attack them, or so the humans believed. Kale's commander, an older, seasoned warrior named Aldrich, gathered his men. The air was thick with uncertainty as they prepared for battle. Kale looked around at his fellow soldiers, each one gripped by a mix of fear and determination. Some had seen wars before, but for many, this would be their first taste of true conflict. The Vulpine landed outside the city gates, their armor glinting in the early sunlight, and they were led by a fierce warrior named Rilia, who was unlike any opponent Kale had ever encountered. She was tall, strong, and her fiery orange fur shone with a fierce glow, as though her very presence commanded attention. Her eyes locked onto Kale from the distance, and in that moment, he knew that she would not hesitate to strike if necessary. As the humans and Vulpine faced off, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. The Vulpine were known for their honor, and they would not strike first without provocation. Yet, the humans could sense the overwhelming presence of the Vulpine warriors, each of them carrying an air of unshakable confidence. "We need to talk," Rilia's voice echoed, surprisingly calm despite the chaos around them. "You've invaded our territory." Aldrich stepped forward, trying to keep the peace. "This is our land. We have no intention of provoking war, but we will defend our city with our lives if necessary." Kale watched as the two leaders exchanged words, but he could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just a diplomatic encounter. There was more at stake here than either side was willing to admit. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and Kale knew that a battle would soon erupt. No matter what they said, Rilia's gaze shifted to Kale. Something about him seemed to intrigue her. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You are not like the others," she said, her voice low. "There's honor in you, I can see it." Before Kale could respond, an arrow suddenly flew through the air, striking one of the Vulpine warriors. The tension that had been building for days finally snapped, and war broke out. Kale found himself in the heart of the battle, his sword drawn and his mind focused. The Vulpine were fast, skilled, and merciless. But Kale fought with everything he had, protecting those around him, as he had always done. It was during the chaos of battle that Kale found himself face to face with Rilia, the leader of the Vulpine. She was a fierce fighter, her movements graceful but deadly. The clash between them was like nothing Kale had ever experienced. Every strike, every parry, every movement was a test of strength and will. But Kale was more than just a soldier. He was a protector. In a moment of desperation, he made a decision that would change everything. With one final strike, Kale blocked Rillia's sword, but the force of the blow sent his own sword plunging into her side. The battlefield seemed to freeze. Kale's heart pounded as he saw Rillia fall to the ground, blood staining the earth beneath her. He had done it. He had taken the blade for her. But in the eyes of the Vulpine, this was not just a battle. It was a symbol of something greater. The Vulpine, bound by their ancient traditions, would now consider Rillia's life debt to Kale. And in the world of the Vulpine, life debts were sacred. The moment Kale had saved her, he had unknowingly claimed something far more valuable than honor. He had claimed her as his own. The traditions of the Vulpine made it clear. Rillia belonged to him. As Kale stood over her, the weight of what he had just done began to sink in. He had no idea what consequences lay ahead, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of a much greater journey. The Vulpine were not a people to take lightly. Their traditions ran deep, and now Kale had unknowingly bound himself to their world in a way he could never undo. The question was, would he survive the consequences of his actions? Would he be able to navigate the politics and customs of a people who held honor above all else? The battle was over, but Kale's fight had just begun. As Kale stood over Rillia, her life hanging in the balance, the battlefield around him began to settle into a haunting quiet. The clash of weapons had ceased, and the cries of war faded into the background. His chest heaved as he stared down at the wounded Vulpine warrior, her fiery orange fur stained with blood. For a brief moment, Kale's world seemed to shrink, leaving only him and her in a bubble of silence. He had saved her. But now, the weight of his action pressed down on him like a stone, and he realized that nothing would be the same again. The Vulpine, bound by their traditions, would not take his actions lightly. He had not only saved her life, he had unwittingly bound himself to their ancient codes. Rillia's breathing was shallow, her body trembling with the pain of the wound. But despite the blood that poured from her side, there was a strange calmness in her eyes as she looked up at Kale. "You've taken a blade for me," she said, her voice laced with both pain and respect. That is something no Vulpine warrior would ever forget." Kale's mind raced. What did this mean? He had heard rumors about the Vulpine and their strict codes, but this was something far greater than he had ever imagined. He had heard of life debts, but he never thought they would apply to him, a simple human warrior. The thought of belonging to the Vulpine, of being tied to their customs, terrified him. What if this led to war between his people and theirs? He could feel the eyes of the remaining Vulpine warriors upon him, and he realized that they were waiting for their leader to either die or be claimed. It was a strange, foreign tradition, but the rules were clear. Rillia was no longer just a warrior. She was now indebted to him, body and soul, and that debt could not be ignored. Kale dropped to one knee beside her, feeling the heat of her blood staining his hands as he gently pressed his palms to her side to try and stop the bleeding. His heart pounded in his chest, and his thoughts swirled with confusion. How had something so simple as saving her life turned into something so complicated? "Please," he said, trying to find the words that would make sense of the situation. "I never wanted any of this. I didn't know your customs, your traditions. I only wanted to protect." Rillia's eyes flickered with something like admiration, though it was tinged with the gravity of their situation. "Your heart is pure," she said softly, a faint smile touching her lips despite her pain. "That's something rare among your kind." Her voice weakened as she spoke, but her pride remained intact. "You've shown me honor, and now I must repay that honor." The other Vulpine warriors who had remained motionless began to murmur amongst themselves. Kale could hear their low voices, but he couldn't make out the words. Were they debating his fate? Were they considering his life debt? His mind raced as the implications of his actions began to settle in. Rillia's gaze never left Kale as she reached out weakly, her hand grasping his arm. You may not understand it now, but in the Vulpine world, honor is everything. You've saved my life. By doing so, you've also saved your place in our world. You are bound to me, whether you like it or not. The words hit Kale like a thunderclap. He felt his stomach twist as he processed what she was saying. Bound to her? Was she saying that he was now tied to her, and her people, forever? What kind of world was this? And what did it mean for his own people, his own city? Before he could respond, Aldrich appeared at Kale's side. The older warrior looked down at the scene with a heavy sigh. We've always known the Vulpine to be strict in their ways. You've done something no one else could have, Kale. You've proven your strength, but now you've proven your life belongs to them as well. Aldrich's words were like ice. Kale could feel the weight of them press down on his shoulders. It wasn't just about honor now. It was about survival. If the Vulpine saw him as one of their own, would they try to pull him into their politics? Their wars? The questions came at him faster than he could answer. Rillia slowly shifted, her body still weak from the wound, but her resolve was unwavering. The Vulpine will accept no less than your full participation in our customs. You will train with us. You will fight with us, and you will defend our honor. As of now, you are mine, bound by the laws of our people. Kale couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. A sense of dread swept over him as he realized that his fate had been sealed. He had no idea what the future held, but it was clear that he was about to be thrust into a world of power, politics, and violence far beyond anything he had known. The world around him seemed to blur for a moment. His mind raced as his thoughts collided with the sudden realization of his new reality. He was no longer just a soldier defending his city. He was now tied to the Vulpine, bound by a debt that he didn't fully understand. And as Rillia's warriors began to surround him, it became clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. The battle may have been won, but Kale had unwittingly stepped into a world of ancient tradition where every action had consequences, and the cost of honor was far higher than he had ever imagined. Asterisk. The days that followed the battle were a blur for Kale. The initial shock of what had happened, of how his life had irrevocably changed, began to wear away, but the reality of his new situation only grew clearer with each passing moment. He was no longer just a human warrior. He was now a part of the Vulpine world, a world governed by honor, tradition, and power. In the Vulpine city, the customs and rituals were as intricate as they were ancient. Every corner seemed steeped in history, and the air itself buzzed with an energy Kale had never known. The streets were lined with statues of past warriors, their faces proud and fierce, and the buildings towered like temples, their design unlike anything Kale had seen before. Everything here was built to remind you of one thing: power and legacy. Rillia, though still recovering from her wound, led Kale through the city with a sense of purpose. Her presence was commanding, her gaze unyielding. It was clear that she was a leader among the Vulpine, not just because of her strength in battle, but because of the respect she commanded from every corner of their society. I know you're confused, Rillia said, her voice steady but gentle as they walked through the crowded streets. But I will teach you the Vulpine Code, Kale. If you are to understand our ways, you must first understand honor. Kale walked beside her, his mind swirling with thoughts of his old life, his people, his home. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was now a stranger in a strange land. Every step he took, he was being pulled deeper into this new reality, and he couldn't deny that there was a part of him that was beginning to understand the weight of his new position. He was no longer an outsider, and in many ways, that was far more dangerous than being an enemy. Rilia led him to a massive structure at the center of the city, a grand hall that seemed to pulse with energy. This, Cale realized, was where the heart of Vulpine society lived. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and the sound of distant murmurs. Vulpine warriors and leaders alike gathered here to discuss matters of great importance, and it was here that Cale would begin his journey to learn their ways. The Vulpine Code, Rilia explained, was simple in its structure, but difficult in its execution. It was based on 3 core principles: strength, loyalty, and honor. Strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about the strength of character, the ability to make hard choices when necessary. Loyalty wasn't just to one's people, or to the clan. It was a loyalty to the traditions that had held them together for centuries. And honor was everything. It was the foundation upon which all of their laws were built. Each of us is born with a purpose, Rilia continued, her voice low as she spoke of their sacred tradition. You've proven your strength by saving my life, Cale, but now you must prove your loyalty to the Vulpine. And above all, you must protect your honor. If you fail in any of these, you will have nothing. Cale listened carefully, trying to absorb what she was saying. He had never considered his actions in terms of honor before. To him, he had simply done what needed to be done to protect someone in need. But now he was realizing that in this new world, every action he took would be scrutinized, measured by the harsh standards of the Vulpine. As they entered the grand hall, Cale felt a chill run down his spine. The room was filled with Vulpine leaders, each of them dressed in elaborate armor, their eyes sharp and assessing. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with expectation. He had never felt so out of place, so vulnerable. Rilia led him to the center of the room, where a tall, imposing figure stood waiting. He was an elder, his fur silvered with age, his eyes wise but cold. This was Cale's first encounter with the Vulpine Council, and the weight of the moment settled heavily on his shoulders. Rilia, the elder spoke, his voice deep and commanding. You bring this human before us. Why? Rilia did not hesitate. He has proven his strength, honored his debt, and saved my life. He's bound to me by our laws, and I will not dishonor the tradition. The elder's gaze shifted to Cale, his piercing eyes studying him with an intensity that made Cale feel as though his very soul was being weighed. You understand the consequences of your actions, human. To bind yourself to the Vulpine is not a simple matter. It is a responsibility, a lifetime of service. You will fight with us, you will train with us, and you will live by our code. Cale stood tall, though the words struck him with an unsettling force. I understand, he said, though the truth was that he wasn't sure he did. What would this life entail? What would his role be in a world so foreign to him? The elder nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. You are bound now. But remember, in the Vulpine world, weakness is not tolerated. Fail to meet our expectations, and you will be discarded. Prove yourself, and you will gain more than just our respect. You will gain power, Cale. With that, the council's decision was made. Cale was now bound by the Vulpine Code, whether he liked it or not. He had proven his strength, but now he would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. Rilia guided him away from the council, her expression unreadable. This is only the beginning, she said. You've earned a place among us, but your journey is far from over. Cale couldn't help but wonder what that journey would entail. He had no choice but to follow the path laid out before him. Whether it led to glory, power, or ruin, he could no longer turn back. The world of the Vulpine was unforgiving, and Cale would soon learn just how deep the debt of honor really went. The days that followed Cale's induction into the Vulpine world were marked by grueling training, sharp lessons in their ways, and the constant pressure of living up to an unspoken standard of honor. He quickly learned that every action he took had consequences, no matter how small. The Vulpine were a proud and disciplined people, and their expectations were as high as the mountains that loomed over their city. His mornings began before dawn, with physical training that pushed him to his limits. Each session was designed not just to test his strength, but his endurance, discipline, and resolve. He sparred with warriors twice his size, his muscles aching from the strain, his mind constantly struggling to keep up with the speed and intensity of the Vulpine way of combat. Yet, as brutal as the training was, Cale could feel himself becoming stronger, more attuned to the Vulpine methods of fighting, efficient, deadly, and precise. The constant clash of blades, the rhythm of combat, began to feel more natural to him with each passing day. Despite the physical toll, the hardest part was adjusting to the mental and emotional weight of the Vulpine Code: loyalty, honor, strength. Cale had always lived by his own sense of justice, but the rules here were not as forgiving. Every mistake was a mark against his honor, and every misstep threatened to erase the fragile bond he had formed with the Vulpine people. His place in their world felt precarious at best, and the fear of failure loomed over him constantly. Rilia, despite being still in recovery, was his constant companion during these trials. She was his guide, his mentor, and in many ways, his enforcer. Her presence was always a reminder of the debt Cale owed, the life debt that had bound him to her. And while Cale had saved her life, he quickly realized that he had far more to prove in order to truly earn his place among the Vulpine. One evening, after a particularly brutal sparring session, Cale found himself in the central courtyard of the city, his body bruised and exhausted. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The air was cool, but the heat from the day's training still clung to his skin. As he leaned against a column to catch his breath, he heard footsteps approaching. Rilia stepped into the courtyard, her movements graceful despite the lingering weakness from her wound. She had been watching him from the shadows, as she often did, observing his progress. "You've improved," she said, her voice low but approving. Cale nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I'm trying, but it feels like I'm barely keeping up. I don't know if I can keep this pace. If I fail, I don't even know what will happen." Rilia's eyes softened for a brief moment, though the hardness that defined her nature was never far from the surface. She approached him slowly, her gaze unwavering. "The Vulpine value loyalty above all. You've proven your strength in battle, Cale, but loyalty is something that must be tested time and time again. To be truly Vulpine, you must prove that you will stand by your people, no matter the cost." Cale frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" Rilia stepped closer, her voice now tinged with seriousness. "The Vulpine are not just a people of warriors. We are a people of tradition. And tradition demands loyalty, even in the most difficult of circumstances. I will soon be called upon to make a choice, a decision that will affect not just my life, but the future of my people. And you, Cale, will be forced to make a choice as well." She paused, letting her words sink in. Cale could feel the weight of her gaze, the unspoken challenge hanging between them. "You see," she continued, "the Vulpine are governed by a council of elders, but we also follow the laws of blood, the bonds that run deeper than any political agreement or pact. If you wish to stand by me, by the Vulpine, you must prove your loyalty beyond words. The council will test you. Cale, they will give you a choice that will force you to either break your bond with me or prove it beyond all doubt." Cale's heart raced. He had already sacrificed so much, but now it seemed that there was even more at stake. What kind of test could they impose on him? What choice would they force him to make? Rilia stepped back slightly, her eyes locking with his. "This is the way of the Vulpine. Loyalty is not given freely. It is earned through action, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for those you are bound to. I cannot shield you from this test, Cale, but I will stand by you if you choose to stand by me." Kale took a deep breath, his mind swirling with uncertainty. He had been thrown into a world of warriors, of traditions that were foreign to him, and yet he felt a strange sense of belonging. Rylia's words echoed in his mind. The test was coming, and it would force him to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. "I will stand by you, Rylia," Kale said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "No matter what happens, I will prove my loyalty." Rylia's lips curled into a faint smile, and for the first time, Kale saw a flicker of something softer in her eyes. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. "Then you are ready, Kale. But remember, loyalty is not a choice you make once. It is a choice you make every single day. And tomorrow you will be tested." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Kale's heart beat faster. He had made his decision. There was no turning back now. Whatever the test would be, whatever it would demand of him, Kale was ready to face it, for honor, for loyalty, and for the bond that now tied him to Rylia and the Vulpine people. The next day, Kale would discover just how far his loyalty would be tested, and how much he was willing to sacrifice for a cause that was now so deeply a part of him. The Vulpine had shown him their ways, but now they would show him their true nature. The question was, would he pass the test? Or would he become just another fallen warrior, his name lost to the sands of time? The day after Kale made his vow of loyalty, the air was heavy with anticipation. The city of the Vulpine seemed to be holding its breath, as if the world itself knew that something momentous was about to unfold. The streets, which had been bustling with life and energy, now felt eerily quiet. Only the distant sounds of warriors training, the sharp clang of metal against metal, broke the silence. Kale knew something was coming. He had felt it in the way the Vulpine warriors looked at him, in the way Rylia had spoken the night before. Today would be the day the council would test his loyalty, not just to her, but to the Vulpine people as a whole. What would that test entail? What sacrifices would they demand of him? Rylia found Kale in the courtyard early that morning, before the sun had fully risen. Her expression was unreadable, but Kale could sense the tension in her posture. Her body was still healing from the wound he had caused, but her resolve was as sharp as ever. "Today is the day," she said, her voice low but firm. "You will face the council, and they will ask you to prove your loyalty. It will be a choice that no Vulpine has ever taken lightly." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deep into his chest. He had no idea what kind of test they would present, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The Vulpine had no room for weakness or indecision. This test would shape not just his future, but his place in their world. Rylia stepped closer, her eyes softening ever so slightly. "No matter what happens today, remember one thing. Loyalty is the ultimate currency in the Vulpine world. It is a bond stronger than blood. You will be forced to choose between me, between the Vulpine, or between your old life. You must pick, Kale. You cannot have both." The words stung more than Kale expected. Could he truly choose between Rylia, the people who had saved him from the battlefield, and the life he had known? Could he abandon his old home, his old people, for a world he had only just begun to understand? But before he could answer, Rylia turned away, her expression hardening again. "The council awaits," she said. Her tone broke her in no further discussion. Kale followed her as they walked through the stone halls of the Grand Hall, past the many statues of Vulpine warriors who had died in battle, their faces frozen in expressions of stoic strength. Each statue seemed to gaze down at him, as if judging whether he was worthy to be counted among them. The feeling was unnerving. At the center of the Grand Hall, the Vulpine Council awaited. The room was dimly lit, with large torches flickering against the stone walls, casting long shadows across the floor. The council members, wise and ancient, stood in a semicircle, their eyes fixed upon Kale as he entered. His heart pounded, But he kept his stance steady. Rilia stepped forward and knelt before the council, as was their custom. Kale, though unsure of the proper protocol, did the same, his knees touching the cold stone floor. The elder from the night before, the one who had spoken so sternly to him, stepped forward. "Kale, human warrior, you have come far in proving your strength," the elder began, his voice deep and gravelly. "You have saved Rilia's life, and you have stood by her side in battle. But today, we ask of you something more." The elder's eyes bore into Kale as if measuring his very soul. "We ask that you choose. Will you remain loyal to Rilia, and through her, the Vulpine way? Or will you forsake that loyalty and return to your people, abandoning the bond you have created with us? There is no middle ground, Kale. You must decide." Kale's chest tightened as the words echoed in the hall. The council's decision was final. If he chose to return to his people, the Vulpine would see it as a betrayal, an abandonment of their bond. If he chose loyalty, if he chose Rilia, then he would be fully immersed in their world, with all of its complexities and dangers. The silence in the room grew thick, oppressive. Kale could feel the eyes of the council on him, waiting for him to make the choice that would define his life. He thought of his home, his city, his family, the life he had known before all this. Could he truly leave it behind? He thought of Rilia too. She had been his guide through this world, his protector, and now she was the very person whose future hung in the balance. But was she asking too much of him? Was he ready to commit himself entirely to this new world? The Vulpine world? Kale could feel the weight of his decision bearing down on him. He had to make a choice, but it felt like there was so much more at stake. This wasn't just about loyalty anymore. It was about who he was, who he would become, and where his future lay. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kale looked up, meeting the eyes of Rilia. She was watching him closely, her expression unreadable, her body still tense. He turned back to the council, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. "I choose loyalty," he said, his voice steady. "I choose Rilia, and I choose the Vulpine. This is where I belong." A murmur spread through the council. Kale felt their eyes on him, their judgment weighing heavily in the air. But Rilia, standing behind him, gave him a brief nod. Her expression was hard to read, but something in her gaze softened. Just for a moment, the elder nodded slowly, a faint approval crossing his ancient face. "So it is done. You have chosen. Welcome fully, Kale, to the Vulpine people." The ceremony was over, but Kale knew that this was just the beginning of his true test. He had chosen loyalty, and now he would have to prove that loyalty every day. He could never go back to the man he was before. From this moment onward, his life would be bound to Rilia, to the Vulpine, and to the ancient traditions that governed their every action. And Kale knew, deep in his heart, that the road ahead would be even more dangerous and uncertain than anything he had faced before. But one thing was clear. His loyalty had been tested, and he had passed. Now the true journey would begin. Weeks passed in the Vulpine city, and Kale's life took on a rhythm he could never have imagined before. His days were filled with rigorous training, daily tests of endurance, and intense lessons in the Vulpine way of life. Every moment was designed to strip him of his past and forge him into something new, something stronger. He had chosen loyalty, loyalty to Rilia, to the Vulpine, to their traditions, and now he had to prove that he was worthy of that choice. Rilia, despite her own internal battles, had become both his anchor and his guide. She continued to teach him the ways of the Vulpine, not just their combat styles, but their strategies, their politics, their ways of thinking. Kale was no longer just a soldier. He was an integral part of their world, and his actions had consequences far beyond the battlefield. But as Kale's bond with Rilia deepened, so did the pressure weighing on him. He had proven his loyalty to the Vulpine people, but with each passing day, The cost of that loyalty grew clearer. Rilia had warned him that he would have to make sacrifices, but Kale hadn't fully understood the gravity of those words until now. The council, who had once viewed him with suspicion, now treated him as one of their own. Yet, the price of his loyalty was not just physical strength or skill in combat. It was far more insidious than that. One evening, as Kale and Rilia stood overlooking the city from the balcony of her quarters, the truth of his situation began to hit him harder than ever. "You've proven yourself, Kale," Rilia said quietly, her voice a mixture of pride and sadness. "But you need to understand something. Loyalty to the Vulpine is not just about following orders or fighting for our people. It's about allegiance to the traditions that have bound us for generations." Kale's eyes narrowed, a sense of unease creeping up on him. "What do you mean?" Rilia turned to face him, her gaze heavy. "The Vulpine Code is unbreakable. Our traditions are sacred, Kale, and while you've been accepted into our ranks, you are still seen as an outsider by many." He swallowed, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. "What do you want from me, Rilia?" She hesitated, her usual composure slipping for a moment. "There will come a time soon when you will have to choose again. Your loyalty will be tested again, Kale, but this time, it will not be as simple as following orders or protecting me. It will be a matter of blood, of honor." Kale's pulse quickened. He could feel the weight of her words, as if the very foundations of his place in the Vulpine world were starting to tremble. "What do you mean by blood?" Before Rilia could respond, the door to her quarters opened, and a figure stepped inside. It was an elder from the council, one Kale had grown familiar with, though not one he had trusted completely. His name was Arkan, and he was a stern figure, his age and experience evident in his every movement. "Rilia," Arkan said, his voice deep and commanding. "Kale, we need to speak. There has been a decision made." Rilia stood tall, her eyes hardening at the mention of the council's decision. "What decision?" Arkan's gaze flickered to Kale before locking with Rilia's. "The council has decreed that Kale must prove his loyalty in the final way, by participating in the ritual of blood." Rilia's face turned pale. "The ritual of blood?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That is a sacred tradition. Not just a test of strength, but of soul. Only those who are truly one with the Vulpine people can survive it." Kale looked back and forth between Rilia and Arkan, his heart pounding. "What is the ritual of blood?" Arkan's expression was grim. "It is a trial, Kale. A trial that determines if you are worthy of being a true Vulpine. It is not a mere test of your loyalty. It is a test of your very being, your spirit. You will face an opponent, someone chosen by the council. You must fight to the death." Kale froze, the weight of the words crashing over him. "To the death?" "Yes," Arkan said. "The ritual is as old as our people. It is sacred, Kale. If you survive, you will be considered one of us in the truest sense. But if you fail, your bond to the Vulpine will be severed, and you will be cast out." Rilia stepped forward, her voice filled with a mix of fear and urgency. "Kale, you don't have to do this. I will speak to the council." "They can—" "No," Kale interrupted, his voice more forceful than he intended. "I've made my choice. I chose loyalty. I chose to be a part of this world. If this is what it takes to prove that I'm worthy, then I'll do it." Rilia's eyes widened in shock, but Kale could see the unspoken pain in them. She knew what this meant. It was a test of survival, but also of heart. He wasn't just fighting for his place in the Vulpine world. He was fighting for his soul. And Rilia knew the cost of failure would be too high. "Then we prepare," Arkan said, his voice final. "Tomorrow, the ritual begins." The next day, Kale stood in the center of an ancient arena, the ground beneath his feet stained by the blood of countless warriors who had come before him. The air was thick with tension, and the Vulpine gathered in the stands, their eyes fixed on the spectacle before them. Rilia stood in the shadows, watching with a mixture of fear and pride, but Cale could sense her desire to intervene. He couldn't. Let her. This was his fight now, and it was not just about him. It was about proving to the Vulpine, to Rilia, and to himself that he was worthy of this life he had chosen. Across the arena stood his opponent, a towering Vulpine warrior, his fur dark and his eyes burning with anticipation. The council had chosen him as Cale's challenger, and he was known for his brutal skill in combat. This fight was not just about strength. It was about proving that Cale could withstand everything the Vulpine stood for. The battle began, and Cale fought with everything he had, every ounce of strength, every bit of training, and every scrap of determination. He was pushed to the brink, his body battered and broken, but he refused to yield. He would not fail. In the end, with a final desperate strike, Cale brought his opponent to the ground. Blood stained the arena floor, and the silence that followed was deafening. Cale stood, his chest heaving, covered in blood, but victorious. Council stood in solemn silence before the elder spoke. Cale, you have proven your loyalty. You have passed the ritual of blood. You are now truly one of us. As Cale looked over at Rilia, he saw something in her eyes, a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper. Something that spoke of a bond forged in the heat of battle, a bond that could never be broken. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. His loyalty had been tested and proven. But the road ahead was uncertain, and Cale knew that his journey with the Vulpine and with Rilia was far from over. But for the first time, he felt truly at home in this world. The price of loyalty had been high, but in the end, it was a price he was willing to pay.